Well, welcome to the sixth talk on world history, which is now going to be looking at the academic responses to the information that I've been sharing about in terms of the worldwide flood and creation. And I've tried to be fair-minded and look at the best work in this area. And I'm just going to pull up the PowerPoint. Just bear with me here. So, academic responses. I've tried to read what I feel has been the best examples of academic responses. It's not been easy because, by and large, the academic world has not engaged with the creation science movement, as we shall see. But I have seen some of the works that have been produced. So, for instance, Dennis Alexander, Creation or Evolution, 2008. He is speaking as a Christian who wants to defend the Bible, but he believes that you can do so on the basis of evolution. However, when I read his book, what became apparent, there was limited evidence of any engagement with creation literature. There was evidence of engagement with the intelligent design work by Dembski and Behe, but nothing to do with the actual, what I call, young Earth creationist position. I was recommended this book by someone when I was talking about these matters, and he suggested Jerry Coyne was a very good book on why evolution is true. Now, admittedly, he's there to defend evolution, but he was also there to, as it were, argue against creationism. Now, there was limited reference to any books being read, and only one reference to attending a creationist lecture. By Darn Gish, and that was some years ago. So I feel that Jerry Coyne hadn't really engaged with the creationist position, but just assumed that evolution was true. Likewise, with Richard Dawkins, The Greatest Show on Earth, which was his attempt to defend evolution and reject creationism. There was no evidence of having read any creationist books. However, there was some evidence in the footnotes of engagement with some selected creationist website articles. And again, as with Coyne, there was a sense when you read the book that Richard Dawkins really didn't understand the nature of the arguments that had been presented against evolution. David Montgomery, Rocks Don't Lie, 2012. Now, I was recommended this book recently. This one is different to the others because it deals with not biology, but with the rocks, and particularly the Grand Canyon. However, when you read this book, again, you were aware that the only creationist book mentioned in the bibliography and that was engaged with was the Genesis Flood, published in 1961. Therefore, Montgomery wasn't really up to date with his understanding of the latest creationist arguments. And it looked like that he just was assuming creationism was false and was presenting his own arguments. The National Academy of Sciences in 1999 produced a booklet called Science and Creationism. Their understanding of the creationist argument suggests a very limited knowledge of the literature produced by creationist scientists. There was no bibliography, so I wasn't able to really see just how much background reading they had done, but there wasn't much evidence that they had done that. In my philosophy work, I came across this book, Peters, Ted, and Hewlett Martinez, Evolution from Creation to New Creation. Now, this was interesting because I came across this book because of another book I'd been reading, which gave one page to this subject, and simply said, well, the arguments for a recent creation have been adequately demolished, as it were, by this other book, Evolution from Creation to New Creation. Now, I did read the relevant sections of this book, and there was really only one chapter that was related to this. Some evidence of research of a number of works produced by Henry Morris being cited, and works by Ken Ham, Duane Gish, and Bill Cooper referred to. However, the most recent of these publications was 1996, and since then the most interesting evidence has been discovered. Soft tissue and carbon-14 in fossils, no junk DNA, and genetic entropy, etc. So my argument would be that since 1996, some amazing evidence in favor of creation has come to light. Now, understandably, this book was only produced in 2003, therefore it's not going to refer to those things. And its reference to the works up to 1996 was reasonable, but there was no real conclusive argument against any of them. But I would give them credit for having read them. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Creationism. Now, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is an interesting set of articles that are online, and they are highly regarded in the philosophy world as being a go-to just for basic understanding of things. Obviously, the expectation was that you do more deeper reading afterwards. Now, their one by Creationism was definitely worth reading because it was written by Michael Ruse, who's considered the most senior person in this field of philosophy. When one looked at the bibliography, it contained only 2 books written by creationists. The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris, which was, again, 1961, the original book, and Evolution, The Fossils Say No by Duane Gish, printed in 1973. That really is quite unsatisfactory if this is supposed to be the senior philosopher arguing against creationism, and they've only read 2 books, both of which are way out of date. That is quite inadequate for an academic research. So, yeah, the situation I found with all these works was that there was no evidence that the people involved had done the academic reading required of their opponents' arguments to warrant that they had any expertise in the issue of creation science. Now, as all these people may well be experts in their own fields, but the one field they're not an expert in is creation science. And since they were arguing against creation science, that, I think, would be unacceptable as an academic response. And when one considers that the issues that I have raised are the overwhelming evidence for creation, as in the balance of probabilities for the age of rocks, the balance of probabilities for evolution, and the balance of probabilities for cosmology, I think there is every reason to argue that the academic world should respond far more positively towards the creation science movement and not simply dismiss them. Now, John Sanford, who is probably the most senior scientist I know amongst the creation scientists, who should have got a Nobel Prize for his work on the gene gun, when he wrote the work Genetic Entropy, which was arguing that evolution couldn't work because the genetic information that is contained in every cell is decaying with every generation. Therefore, time is not evolution's friend, but its enemy. He wrote that book originally in 2005. He wrote another edition of the book in 2014, and this is what he says. 9 years have passed since the first edition of Genetic Entropy. How has the book fared? From the scientists in the field who are qualified to respond, I have only heard deafening silence. This is really remarkable, he said. In all his experience of science, he has never had this happen. And it appears that what's happened in the creation science movement is it has been effectively ignored by the academic world, no matter how senior the scientists involved are. And I'm going to suggest that one of the reasons is an overriding sense that creation science is not a science at all. And the reason for that is because of science's belief in what we call methodological naturalism. And that is the belief that the only things that are worthy of scientific investigation are things which have material causes. And because creation and the intelligent design movement both use, I might call, a supernatural cause, by that very nature, unscientific, and therefore not worthy of scientific refuting. And one gets this in the two legal cases that came up in America. One was the Arkansas 1982 case, which was a judgment against creationism being taught in schools. And in the Arkansas 1982 verdict, the judge made the following statement as to why creation science was not science: because it depends upon a supernatural intervention, which is not guided by natural law. And so we can see the use of what we call methodological naturalism there. Science only deals with material causation. In the more recent 2005 Dover case, which was against the intelligent design movement, in the 2005 Dover case, the following statement about the intelligent design movement was made in the concluding remarks of the plaintiff: the fact that it invokes the supernatural is by itself disqualifying. And so it really looks to me that we have a problem here, that methodological naturalism does not allow us to consider the creation accounts or the worldwide flood. However, we accept we live in a world where miracles do happen, and evidence from Professor Keener suggests that is almost certainly the case. Then the prohibition of using non-natural causes in science poses an interesting problem. Miracles mean there will be events which science cannot explain. In circumstances where we have reason to believe a miracle has taken place, and these events must be treated as historical events that do not have a scientific explanation. The worldwide flood is such an event, therefore it will not have a scientific explanation. Now, that's very interesting. The same would be true of creation. Creation is a historical event. It will not have a scientific explanation. So we have a problem. If we can't teach these things in science, we have to teach them in history. However, such an approach means science is limited in what it can say about past events that could have non-natural causes. The formation of rocks and the history of living organisms are subject to this limitation. So would the formation of the universe. So science has a problem. If it does not want to accept any non-natural causes, then it must limit itself to only dealing with events in the recent past or in the present. Once you go beyond 4,000 years and you're hitting the worldwide flood, well, there you have a historical event which had a non-natural cause. Now, either scientists are prepared to say, so be it, we will not investigate that because it's not a scientific event. That will be okay, but then they can't then use science to talk about the origin of things, because there is history that says that did not happen that way. So either science puts to one side its total adherence to methodological naturalism, or it limits itself to only talking about the present. But what it can't do is say, I can tell you how the past happened, and I'm only going to use methodological naturalism. Because that is to prejudge the case. And if we live in a world where miracles take place, and as I say, Professor Keener has shown that, then such a presumption is not valid. And as I've shown with the balance of the probabilities, I believe the evidence clearly fits that of a worldwide flood and of a recent creation. Now that completes my talks about the scientific side of world history. My next talks will all be dealing with the history side of world history. So thank you very much for listening, and I will now attempt to close down, which always takes me a little bit of time.